March 15th, 2000, the day of infamy, as far as I'm concerned. Woke up in the morning, started having coffee, telling our team of people that had just arrived that, you know, the chances of seeing a beaked whale in a 10-day period are slim. My assistant, Dave, came running inside and saying, Ken, there's a beaked whale right on the beach, right in front of the house. And sure enough, there was a goosebeak whale swimming, moving its tail anyway, as if it was trying to get up the beach. In my mind, or maybe out loud, I said, "What are you doing here?" They're supposed to be in deep water. So I pushed it back out to sea.
Go, baby, go.
And it swam out a little ways. And it came back in. We did this 2 or 3 times, and then some neighbors came along and said, "There's another one down at the point." Covered it with sheets and kept splashing water on it while the rest kept trying to push the other whale out. And then our neighbors came and said, "There's another whale, another 200 yards up the beach from us." As the day unfolded, we had people calling from all over the northern Bahamas, saying the whale strand here, whale strands there. Something was causing all these whales to want to abandon the deep water and get the hell out of there. It was kind of devastating. Animals that I had grown to know over a 10-year period were now dead. They were trying to get away. I was driven to find out why.
Everywhere on Earth, we can hear the songs of life, from the smallest insects to the largest animals on the planet. But most of us only hear half of this living symphony. There's a completely different orchestra playing beneath the surface of the sea.
One of the most memorable moments I have in my life was the first time I put on headphones in the Arctic. It's gray and white. It's almost complete sensory deprivation. I can't smell anything. I can barely taste anything. We'd found a little opening of water in which I dropped 2 underwater microphones. Put on the headphones, I was completely amazed. Bearded seals coming out of the ether as though they were from the Martian Chronicles. Beluga whales chirping and chattering and clicking. And then the bowhead whales. roaring, low-frequency moans. And it was like, oh my God, this is fantastic.
Chris Clark has been recording the symphony of life on Earth for more than 40 years. He has built one of the largest collections of animal sounds on the planet.
I listen to the world, and to me, song is life. It is the essence of who we are, and it joins us all. The problem is, in the ocean, we are injecting enormous amounts of noise. So much so that we are basically acoustically bleaching the ocean. All the singing voices of the planet are lost in that cloud of noise.
This accumulation of sound is changing the entire ecosystem underwater. Some of the animals most directly affected by this sonic invasion are the largest ever to have lived on Earth.
They're so large and they're so dramatic and magnificent. They are highly conscious animals. They have self-awareness. They think. They have intellectual capabilities that rival ours. And their graciousness.
They're mammals. They're just like us. They're a very specialized form of life on this planet that basically rules the ocean. All whales can hear. They have to for their survival.
The ocean is a completely different place acoustically than in air. Sound can travel enormous distances, very, very fast, whereas light doesn't travel very far at all. And the whales have evolved to take advantage of that. They can hear storms that are 1,000 miles away.
For humans, well, it's important for us to hear, but not nearly as important as it is for whales, dolphins, and many kinds of fish. They rely on being able to sense their environment acoustically. Whether it's finding their buddies, knowing where food is, knowing where the shoreline is. Now, they certainly have eyes, and they use their eyes, but they're far more reliant on their hearing to live. Think about it. Even in the clearest ocean water, visibility is nothing close to what you have on the land. I mean, 100 feet is considered to be really good, but you can look up at the stars and see light that has been transmitted over millions of miles. On the land, you can look and see mountains in the distance, miles away.
Just as air is a brilliant medium for light, water is a brilliant medium for sound. To give you an example, in the early 1990s, a group of scientists put a noise-making device down in the southern Indian Ocean. They wanted to see just how far sound would travel. The sound that they produced carried into the Atlantic Ocean, into the Pacific Ocean. It carried as far as those researchers were listening. Their furthest hydrophone, or underwater microphone, was positioned off of Washington State, which means that the sound traveled some 17,000 kilometers and was still audible.
And the whales see the ocean through sound. So their mind's eye is their mind's ear. So I'm in this tent with an Inupiat whaling captain, and I want the ears for science. I want to get the ear bones of the whale so that I can give them to a colleague who's a scientist to understand, how do they hear? What is so different about these animals? And this Inupiat whaling captain just looked at me, and very deliberately he said, "Do you know that the ears are the entrance to the soul of the whale?" And now I even get emotional remembering that statement. The ears of this animal are the entrance to its self-consciousness, to its life, to its history, to its future.
The Bahamas stranding, we had specimens that had died within hours, and I knew that collecting a fresh specimen and freezing it as soon as possible would provide the best evidence that would show what sort of damage was going on internally. I transported 2 beaked whale heads and a dolphin from Bahamas and got them over to a commercial airplane going to Boston. Trucked the specimens right over to the CAT scans at Harvard Medical School, and by 2 a.m. had seen the evidence of subarachnoid hemorrhage around the brain and blood around the ears. They were definitely impacted. I knew that it was a human-caused stranding. I was very concerned that we learn what specifically are we doing that is causing these mortalities and not do this again.
Humans have been changing the sound of the oceans since we first started exploring the seas, but our ocean presence has exploded over the last 5 decades.
The world that these long-lived creatures have experienced has changed on a geologic scale. We are seeing just a different planet.
Some whales, they live to be 150 to 200 years old. When those whales were teenagers, the world was quiet. Okay, so if I disrupt your ability to hunt, or if I disrupt the ability of a female to make a choice between the best singers because she can only hear the ones that are closest to her, what's the impact of that?
Getting lost in the ocean must be terrifying to a young whale. Can't find its mother, can't find its family. A lost whale, in that sense, would be likely a dead whale.
I've known about whale song for a long time, and I've heard it many times, and also I'm astounded by the distance that their songs can travel, that they have to communicate, sometimes ocean-wide. It's like a telephone. And so it would be logical that their hearing would be as powerful as their reach when they sing. I make my living as a musician. I've subjected myself to industrial levels of noise because of it. and my hearing is impaired. And so I'm increasingly more aware of the sonic world we live in. I prefer silence. I was born and raised next to a shipyard in the north of England. At the end of my street are some of the biggest ships ever constructed on planet Earth. They would launch them with the timbers cracking and the drag chains being pulled. And as a small child, I found that stirring and frightening. No, you wouldn't think about what was going on under the sea. It was just a means of, transporting things or transporting people rather than to go underneath it.
The dominant change in the conditions of underwater noise has been from commercial shipping. So ships are the way we really move goods on this planet. We move over 98% of the stuff that we need to get from point A to point B using ships.
At any given time, there are an estimated 60,000 commercial ships traversing the world's oceans.
They're enormous. They're like cities on water, with far fewer people. And the sound of all of those ships, all in the water at once, has literally filled our oceans with noise.
One of the things about noise in the ocean is that humans are not aware of it at all. It's one of these out of sight, out of mind kind of things. It really is, in a sense, a cacophony of sound that surrounds the whales at this point.
Paul Spong is the co-director of Orca Lab, a whale research station on Hansen Island off British Columbia, Canada. He and his team use hydrophones to record and study the sounds of orcapods in the Pacific Northwest.
There are a host of reasons for caring about whales. Certainly the beauty and their lifestyle. With orcas, you have, for example, the most powerful creature on the planet, living an utterly peaceful life. That's impressive. Each of the family groups has their own special dialect that we listen to. So we can understand a lot about who's there just from the sounds that they make. We know when they're hunting, we know when they're resting, we know when they're socializing, we know when they're having a great time together down at the rubbing beaches, because we're listening all the time. Cruise ships, the freighters, are a very recent phenomenon in their history. Now, sound is everywhere around them, much of the time. When a cruise ship comes along, and the cruise ship kind of comes around the corner into the acoustic field of the whales, and you can hear what happens. This is a group of G-clan whales. Anyway, the whales are calling away, and they try to continue it for a little while, and then they get totally drowned out. Noise interferes with hunting, with the whale's ability to find fish. Well, if you reduce the amount of food that whales can get, then you're directly impacting their well-being, their lives.
I think when you listen to the hydrophones, it's hard to think that that noise does not have an impact on the whales. I mean, sometimes listening on the headphones gives you a headache. Within 10 minutes, you have to take the headphones off, you have to turn the volume down. And I just think, the whales, they can't turn the volume down.
Several years ago, I was at a meeting about ship noise in Hamburg, Germany, and we went down and saw some of the newest and largest container ships, and they're striking. They're basically skyscrapers turned sideways with giant engines put on the back of them. Some of the sound may come from the engines that's transmitted through the hull, but the majority of it comes from what is happening right at the propeller.
It's called cavitation. That's when the bubbles created by the blades of the propeller collapse and burst underwater.
It's not so much the collapse of an individual bubble, it's all of them at once, creating a very loud hiss. Ship's engines generate noise as well.
Basically, the way ship engines are historically built is you bolt them to the frame. And then it vibrates the frame and makes that sound transmit through all the steel or the hull and out into the water.
Over the last 60 years, the number of ships moving over the global surface of the world has increased dramatically. You can look at the curves and it's just going up and up and up and up. It really is just like a highway. You know, the Los Angeles Freeway or the Long Island Expressway, and if you looked at the taillights of those cars, it would be solid light. That's the shipping lane. Where in this case, the light is all the noise from all the ships. Is there any evidence that all this noise is making life difficult for whales and fishes? Most of humanity lives in the northern hemisphere. There's a fraction of the percentage of commercial shipping in the southern hemisphere. But we have southern right whales. They're cousins of the northern right whales. Those populations are going gangbusters. But up north, their cousins, same kind of habitat, everything else. They're struggling to get by. Why is that? You say how many ships are going through the area, but so what? How do you show that that has any influence or any impact or makes any difference?
But we really needed a laboratory for that. We needed a place where you could draw a line around it and ask, okay, within these waters, what are those contributions?
Researchers chose Cape Cod Bay near Boston, an important habitat of North Atlantic right whales.
And what was surprising in that was how bad it was.
You see right whale calls illuminated like little firefly light. And then, every so often, several times a day, a ship will come in. It comes in like a floodlight. It obliterates the whale's ability to hear.
The study revealed that North Atlantic right whales lost up to 80% of their ability to hear the songs of their friends and mates.
That's a really dramatic loss of space for these animals during really critical time periods.
It's just ripping the communication system apart. Are they not getting enough to eat? And are they stressed out? So there you get a linkage to the whole reproductive cycle, to the whole biology. There may be 450 of them left in the entire ocean. That species is fighting for its life right now.
I joined the Navy in March 1967, learned how to fly, got my wings, and got stationed at a SOSUS station, which was sound surveillance undersea. The operations were that you listen to hydrophone systems in the ocean for enemy submarines.
SOSUS. That name was top secret. Someone says to me, "Hey, Doc, you think you could use this for studying whales?" And it was like expletive deleted. Are you blipping kidding me? And it was in that room I literally crossed the beams, pointing to a blue whale singing off of Ireland. I was listening to it from Virginia.
Since biologists have been given access to SOSUS, it has become the single most important tool for listening to whales ocean-wide. This listening system has also allowed scientists to track the rise of human-produced noise in the ocean over time.
Large commercial shipping has kind of a rumbling like a distant thunderstorm all the time. When I was in the Navy, that was just a fact of life in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even today, is that the noise environment in the ocean is doubling every 10 years.
There's different ways that sounds can affect animals. I mean, there's that underlying ambient noise level that's rising and rising and rising that interferes with communication and their movement patterns. And then there's the more acute, kind of traumatic impact of sound, and that's causing physical damage. Or just a really strong behavioral response. It's fight or flight. Basically, all my professional life, I've been responding to marine mammal strandings. Dolphins, whales, and seals. Sometimes when we think of a mass stranding, it's not just animals throwing themselves on the beach, but being out of habitat. One example is in Madagascar in 2008. As we flew in, going into this very small, very rural area, we asked the pilot if he would do a tour. We had been told there are 100 to 200 melon-headed whales in an estuary. They were 65 kilometers away from the open ocean. And I think our hearts fell at that point because we looked at it and we said, it's a huge distance to go. Most of the animals were in pretty tough shape. They looked thin, dehydrated. These are animals that probably were stranding at some point during the day, getting sunburned, abrasions, and cuts and bruises from being up in the mangrove swamps. We herd the whales just like a cowboy would herd cattle. We move boats the way that you would ride a horse behind cattle.
Oh, one right there.
Trying to move these animals very slowly out into open water. As the day would wear on, you could just see them deteriorating. They were becoming slower, less responsive to what we were trying to do. In the end, we probably saved a handful of whales. Most of them died. And then our job was to go in and figure out why they were there. These animals weren't sick, they weren't injured. We ruled out the things that we knew it wasn't. And the only smoking gun left was this oil and gas exploration work being done offshore that coincided in time and location with this event.
Prospecting teams commissioned by an ExxonMobil subsidiary were hunting for oil off the coast of Madagascar, near the mouth of the river. They were using a special industrial echo sounder that emits sound waves to map the seafloor.
ExxonMobil stopped all of the work that they were doing, and they provided volumes of data. When I was reading through all of it, one thing caught my eye, and it was a series of satellite photographs of this region, and they were claiming these images showed that there were animals stranded prior to the work that they were doing offshore, so they couldn't have caused it. In the images, there were these dark objects lined up, perpendicular to the water, and they were claiming that these were all whales that had stranded. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, I've been doing strandings for almost 20 years, and I've never seen animals beach themselves in such a perfect pattern. And I was like, those are boats. Those are dugout canoes used by local fishermen. That was the moment that I got really angry, and I was like, you know what, now there's no way you can believe that. They were throwing everything at us to say it couldn't have been us, and I looked at that and I said, no, there's no way.
An independent scientific review panel came to the same conclusion as Moore and her team. The whales were most likely trying to escape the noise of the industrial echo sounder. But fossil fuel companies are doing much more than just mapping the ocean with waves of sound.
More and more and more what you're seeing is deep ocean prospecting for oil and gas. So the modern form of dynamite is found in the form of air guns. Most of which goes vertically down into the ocean and reflects off the Earth's crust. And then you create an image of the composition of the Earth, and you search for oil and gas. And then you have sets of them, 10, 20, 30, 40 of them in what's called an array. It's a big matrix of them behind the ship, and they all explode simultaneously. And there are multiple surveys, all setting off these charges at a regular rate of 10 seconds or 12 seconds. And the survey goes on for months at a time. If you were listening in the ocean, you could hear the regular explosions of these sounds coming from Africa, South America, Great Britain, Canada. And now, it's also invading into the Arctic.
Air guns have been shown to have an enormous environmental footprint. In baleen whales, the great whales, they've been shown to silence animals. They've been shown to cause animals to flee large areas of habitats. The areas we're talking about are enormous, in some cases documented over literally hundreds of thousands of square miles.
These companies are able to take resources from the global commons, hydrocarbons in this case, and exploit those and damage the ocean ecosystem without cost. That, to me, is intolerable.
The sound of seismic prospecting for oil and gas is changing life in the oceans. But it's also changing life for people who depend on the oceans, living on land.
This coast has made thousands of generations able to survive. All my relatives before me lived from this, and I've been a fisherman for many years. What is happening now is a disaster to us. The oil industry is hunting oil and gas on our fishing grounds. Catches immediately were reduced by 60%. This was massive, and this was clearly the seismic shootings, the blastings. Then, after some time, not coming back. It's not coming back. Why is it so? It should come back if everything was normal in the sea. If this is going to go on, those blastings in the sea, in all the world's sea, we are going to kill ourselves in the end because we are killing our food. This is happening all around the world. We know it. But it seems like we are not able to do anything about it.
We've been successful before in acting to protect the health of the oceans and the largest animals on Earth. There was a time when the oil of whales was the natural resource used to fuel our world.
The great whales were literally pushed to the brink of extinction when everything was fair game. It was a total horror story.
What happened in the early 20th century is that practice became industrialized. Whalers started using large factory ships, and they began decimating populations.
The consequences of human consumption were apparent to legendary oceanographer Jacques Cousteau, who battled against commercial whaling. Most countries agreed to stop whaling in the 1980s, and some whale populations have rebounded since then. Jacques' son, Jean-Michel, driven by a similar passion for the oceans and the largest animals on Earth, continues his father's legacy.
My father, when I was a kid, created a movie very well known, which has put the ocean in everybody's home, called The Silent World. Well, it was pretty silent then. The big difference between the past and today is that we've created a lot of noise. I wish we were making music, but we're not. When you're in a place where there may be whales and dolphins, put a mask on with a snorkel, go in 5 feet of water, and close your eyes and listen. fascinating.
My first real encounter with a whale was in Patagonia.
The first time I saw a really, really friendly humpback whale was at Silver Bank, Dominican Republic.
With 3 humpback whales in Hawaii.
When we first came to Hansen Island, we brought a little kayak along with us, and I started paddling around with the whales to see if I could understand more about them.
We had 2 guys on board. They were just sort of like space cadets. One of them was a Vietnam vet that had been shot I don't know how many times and had every bone in his body had some kind of metal plate or shrapnel. Anyway, he just wanted to see a whale, you know, and we're telling him, well, you're on the wrong trip, guy. We're not going to get near one.
Big fog bank came in and surrounded me, and I got totally lost. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where the whales were. I didn't know where I was. The current was taking me. I had my flute on board, and I picked up my flute and started to play it, probably to calm me down. After a few minutes, the whales came by.
As they were moving, they were coming toward me. They could have gone somewhere else. They knew I was there.
And all of a sudden, I felt something under my flippers.
And then the whale came under the boat, and the first mate was freaking out like they're all going to die.
And just lifted me out of the water.
The whale lifted the boat up on its back, and, you know, it was clear out of the water.
I put down my flute and picked up the paddle and started following them. And after a little while, I got lost again. So I stopped paddling and picked up my flute and started playing it. And they came back around me again.
And I dove down, and I looked her in the eye.
We were looking at each other.
When you look in the eyes of a whale, they're actually they're seeing your soul. You know, and if you're perceptive, you'll see their soul.
And I reached out and touched her.
I could have touched them.
Took its flipper and just and laid it on the head of this guy from, you know, the guy that was all shot up. You know, he was just so excited. He was sitting there playing with the barnacles and stuff on it. And the first mate was thinking, well, he's going to get his head chopped off.
When you are a little wee diver there, they know you're there. They flip them and fold them back because they're totally aware of your presence. And they don't want to hurt you.
Finally, I came to an island that loomed up out of the fog and landed and waited until the fog cleared. I would say one of the profound experiences I had.
To me, these are some of the most emotional experiences I've had.
That was it. I was in love, right? That was it.
I was listening to the noise that sea mammals and fish are subjected to, which was painful to me. I can see that it would cause a psychosis, you know, day after day.
Hearing really developed as an animal detection system. Primary means of establishing an alert that you had to get away quickly, because really it was a matter of flight or hide were your only modes of survival. Our system's stress in response to noise comes from this environmentally animal necessity of avoiding a threat. So we hear sirens on the street. Every one of those sirens, it can be shown, you're going to get some elevation in heart rate, some vasoconstriction, release of stress hormones. All of these different stress markers happen to you. So we're getting this barrage of stress even when we don't perceive it as such. If you've ever been in an incredibly loud club or a loud party or a loud restaurant, and there was a moment when you actually felt vertigo or nausea because you didn't think that you could survive there another moment, and you burst out the door. Imagine what it is for these marine species that have no door to pass through to get away. There's nowhere to go.
few years ago, there were a group of researchers who had been taking fecal samples of North Atlantic right whales. They saw something really funny in their data. Taken from 2001, those fecal samples registered fewer and fewer stress hormones. They looked more closely, and they found that their samples seemed to turn around a particular date, and that was September 11th. After September 11th, there was a halt to so much of shipping traffic, and that fall in shipping traffic seemed to correlate with a dramatic fall in stress hormones in right whales. They didn't see this in any other year.
There's a direct, significant correlation between the amount of ship noise and the physiology and the stress levels in these animals.
It's a devastating finding. It's shocking because it's so measurable what was found in the wake of the attacks.
One of the first things they teach you at the Naval Officer Academy is, he who rules the ocean rules the world. And it's true. I talked a friend into going for a flight the following morning, the stranding. We searched around and found more specimens, but we also saw military ships, U.S. Navy destroyer, and some other warships. So then I just put the two and two together.
The missing piece of the puzzle for Ken Balcomb was the U.S. Navy, an institution he had served in with distinction during his early career.
Their warships were bouncing their sonars with very high intensity, mid-frequency sound. A screeching tone that's hard to listen to. It's just overpowering. I can't imagine anything more absurd than dropping acoustic bombs in downtown cities. It's equivalent.
Naval warships use a technique that mimics the natural abilities of whales and dolphins.
They'll send out a click and listen for the echo off a target and know how far away it is and how fast it's moving, and even what kind of target.
Sonar is the principal submarine detection system used by the U.S. Navy and other navies of the world.
Joel Reynolds has spent much of his career fighting in the courts to protect the oceans.
The Navy developed something called active sonar, and this is the system that they use to protect our massive aircraft carriers with 5,000 sailors on them. In its simplest terms, it involves generating extremely loud sound underwater to detect targets.
It's in a sweep, so when the sweep is pointed right at you, you get the full intensity of it. And then about a minute later, it does it again.
We began to investigate. We learned that they had no permits, they'd done no environmental reviews, there were no safeguards built into the program to protect the marine environment.
The impact of active sonar on whales and dolphins has been clearly documented in the Bahamas case and others where animals have been killed.
When biologists have studied their bodies, they have seen an array of very disturbing pathologies, bleeding around the brain, lesions in organ tissue, all consistent with decompression sickness or the bends. Divers know that they have to surface gradually when they're ending a dive. Otherwise, nitrogen can build up in the blood to the point where it damages the body. That is precisely what seems to be happening to beaked whales.
They're deep water animals. All of a sudden, they just leave the water. And now they can't decompress.
After the Bahamas strandings occurred, the Navy denied it was involved. It took the better part of 2 years for it to admit culpability.
The chief of naval operations, the head guy, was convinced finally that, yeah, that's their fault. They did it.
There are many other navies of the world that use this same kind of technology to detect submarines. Many of them follow our lead, of course. It's a global problem in its truest sense.
Probably the most visible effect of ocean noise has been this series of mass strandings of whales on beaches around the world. Time and again, in Bahamas and the Canary Islands, off Spain, off Greece, they have turned up along the coasts. The Navy was acting lawlessly for years before we started taking them to court. It's not an easy thing to fight the U.S. Navy. I think a lot of us look at the Navy as people acting in the public interest, and it's a little painful to have to go after them. But once we did, they started doing environmental reviews. They started getting permits. They started a research program, which is now the largest source of marine mammal research funds probably on the planet. The trick is to get the Navy to move beyond research. We're at the point where we know enough to say that the Navy has to do more to reduce harm from its exercises.
We don't believe there's an inconsistency between defending the United States and protecting the environment. Whales and other marine life should not die for practice.
Three years after the Bahamas stranding, Ken Balcomb was watching orcas from his new home in Washington State.
The ship was about 3 miles out. It was just like deja vu of the Bahamas. No, I was just dumbfounded.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they're right here. We've got it all on video and sound. The problem is, I think they're hurting the whales.
Shut the damn thing off.
This is nuts, man. This is nuts.
Before the ship started utilizing its sonar, the whales were feeding at Salmon Bank, south end of this island. Something very unusual was happening. All the whales gathered together in groups and went very close to the shore. We started seeing every porpoise. They're all just streaking as fast as they could go away from the sound. And a minke whale was going away from the sound.
Navy sonar is like an enormous predator. When whales hear it, some go silent, stop foraging, and abandon their habitat. Repeated exposure to sonar can harm whole populations.
You didn't have to have a hydrophone to hear the sonar. It was virtually unbearable for us on the porch. I can't imagine what it must have been like underwater. In the following days, 11 porpoises were found on the beach, dead. You know, one of the complaints from an admiral was that, well, you know, we can't worry about the fish.
Nobody comes in the Navy that I know of to say they want to hurt a whale. When I was in the Navy, I had the honor of commanding 3 warships, the Commodore of 13 warships, and then Chief of Staff of Naval Surface Forces. If you know that there's a whale in the area, unless you're at war, you're trying to avoid using those sonars.
Mid-frequency sonar can be pretty loud. Putting sound in the water can have an impact upon whales and other mammals that inhabit the ocean. It's also important to understand that what the sound is looking for are a potential enemy whose intent is to kill sailors and destroy our ships.
What's at stake if we are not good at anti-submarine warfare is not only the threat of loss of life of America's sons and daughters and our friends and allies, but also those capital ships that we invest in. Ships are expensive, and obviously human beings can't be replaced. So we have to be very good at anti-submarine warfare.
I don't believe that national security and environmental protection are inconsistent at all. I think there has to be an accommodation between those two principles where the Navy can operate in a way that has the minimal impact upon the environment and still perform its training, and if necessary, its mission.
We all value security. We have to think of security, however, in the broader terms of what we're doing to our life support system. And that means considering life in the ocean as a part of what makes our lives possible.
We can't support the human population at the rate we're growing with a diminishing ecosystem. And they're the sentinels of whether or not it's healthy out there. Killing them off is not sensible.
The typical mode that we all have is status quo. It's easier in some ways not to do anything than it is to do something. So we are at this tipping point.
This is a problem that we can solve. The question is whether we have the political will to solve it. That's really what it comes down to.
I attended a shipping conference not long ago where the organizers started the conference by saying, if only we knew 50 years ago what we know today about sound in the ocean, we could design propellers that are not only much quieter, but are more efficient.
Designing a quieter ship will result in increased fuel efficiency, which is reduced cost to the owner. We're talking about ships that have fuel costs on a per vessel basis, tens of millions of dollars a year. So designing more efficient vessels just makes a whole lot of sense.
Researchers and navies have been modifying their ships to reduce noise for years. Commercial ships can reduce the noise that they put in the water by some 90%. That's significant.
Another way to reduce the noise is go a little slower.
Chris Clark also advocates speed limits for cargo ships, as well as rerouting shipping lanes where they are clearly impacting habitats.
The average waiting time for a ship when it gets to port before it unloads its cargo is 3 days. Wouldn't it make sense to maybe go a little slower, can save billions of dollars in fuel costs, and then when you get to shore, you have a very efficient system of getting the cargo off the ship rather than sitting there for 3 days?
So reducing noise could be a win-win-win. A win for marine mammals having to deal with noise in the ocean, a win for the climate and for humans who have to deal with air pollution, and even a win for industry saving money over the life of a ship.
In terms of human life, there's a threat that they have to prepare for and then practice for. I think they should avoid the problems. And you avoid them by not practicing in where you know sensitive animals are.
Breeding areas, feeding areas, migratory routes. When there are animals present, test someplace else.
We are searching harder every day for more and more oil everywhere. So if there is a technology to make it less abusive to the sonic world, then we should embrace that no matter what the cost.
Are there alternative technologies other than setting off a bomb every 9 seconds that are available to us today? And the answer is, you bet there are. And you can be profoundly quieter than the explosion. For example, there's an emerging technology called marine vibrosize that doesn't produce an explosion. It produces a continuous, very low frequency sound that is thousands of times less intense and less invasive than an explosion. And it also produces a much higher resolution image of the Earth.
It won't cure the problem. There will still be impacts, but it would at least reduce the fever. The one good thing about ocean noise is that when you stop making noise, it goes away.
I've always believed from the very beginning of my struggle, my fight, that we are going to win this. I've become a grandfather. I'm all the time thinking about who is coming behind us, our children, our grandchildren, and who comes behind them. What are we leaving for the next generations? Will they survive?
Things that we could not know going back 50 years ago now are coming into focus. The ocean, through all of human history, has made it possible for us to thrive, to live, to have a secure future. We can't go back, but we can make things better going forward. This is the time to return the favor.
My father used to say, people protect what they love. And I kept telling him, how can you protect what you don't understand? And now we're starting to understand. And that information, we need to bring it everywhere, in every school. We need to get the kids out, wet.
I have a daughter who's 4.5, and she hasn't seen a whale yet. And I want to make sure that she sees a whale and that her kids see whales and their kids see whales.
Oh my God! Look at the white! Wow! Oh my God!
Okay, that might have been one of the greater moments of my life.
There's something incredible about that experience, and the planet is not just about us. We're one species here, and it's incredibly irresponsible for us not to be better stewards.
And it's not about science. Science plays a role in it. You use science, but it really comes down to what do we value? We value a living ocean. We're putting the ocean at risk. And if you put the ocean at risk, you're putting all of us at risk.
Over the reefs of moonshine, under the skies of fall, north, northwest, the stones of Pharaoh, under the Arctic fire, over the seas of silence, falling on frozen ropes, for all my days remaining would not be true. All colors bleed to red, sleep on the